Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be going through some of the books on my shelves that have less than 30,000 readers on Goodreads. Why, you may ask? Because I want to sate my own curiosity, to be honest. A big chunk of my physical collection came from the Miami Book Fair International, which I used to go to every single year with my grandmother back when I lived in Florida. The street fair does sell a lot of new and unused books, but the real gems of the street fair, in my opinion, are all of the stalls that have boxes upon boxes upon boxes of used books being sold for like $1. Between those stalls and the stalls to promote indie authors, I've accumulated a lot of books over the years that I just think a lot of people probably haven't heard of, for good and bad. For some of these books, I think, how do I put this kindly? I think it's maybe unsurprising that it has as few readers as they do, so this isn't 100% a recommendations video. But there were some books where I was shocked by how few readers it seems to have, some books that I think absolutely deserve more readers, and some books that I didn't necessarily rate highly myself, but I know that there is a perfect audience for it out there. So maybe me talking about those books will find the person that is the perfect reader for some of these books. We have a lot of books to get through today. This video doesn't cover every single one of the books on my shelves that has less than 30,000 readers on Goodreads. Some got left out arbitrarily, or some just got left out because I forgot I owned them when I wrote out the notes for this video. But let's start with descending order, starting with books that have just under 30,000 ratings on Goodreads, the first being Plain Bad Heroines. So as of this video, there were 28,640 ratings on Goodreads for this book, which was definitely a surprise to me because I remember a time on BookTube where I felt like I was seeing people talking about Plain Bad Heroines everywhere. But I guess that was just my bubble of YouTube because I would have expected more than 28,000. I gave Plain Bad Heroines 5 stars. Take that rating with a grain of salt though, because there are a lot of reviews on this book that are super lukewarm, and I don't necessarily disagree with them. Plain Bad Heroines is a dual timeline gothic horror. The first timeline takes place in 1902 at this girls' school, where a group of young girls are obsessed with the author of this scandalous memoir named Mary MacLane. The girls create this secret club dedicated to Mary and to her memoir that they call the Plain Bad Heroine Society. Some of the girls are later found dead with a copy of Mary's book near their bodies, having died from a swarm of angry yellow jackets. And then a few years later, more girls die in mysterious accidents at this school until the school is finally shut down. Over a century later, someone writes this queer feminist history about the events at the school, and the book is slated to get a film adaptation. The film is starring a celebrity actor named Harper and a B-list actor named Audrey, who are both going to play some of the founding girls of the Plain Bad Heroine Society. This timeline's story starts with the two of them, plus the author of the history book, preparing to go to the girls' school to start filming the movie. Plain Bad Heroines caught me at exactly the right time to get 5 stars. I don't know that if I were to reread it today, it would get anything more than 4 stars. I think you really have to be in a particular mood to want what this book delivers. If you look at it, it is a chonker of a book. I mean, that's 600 something pages, and trust me, you're gonna feel every single one of those pages. It got a lot of criticism for being way too long and way too slow, and I agree with those criticisms to an extent. I think the story could have been condensed, especially the story in the present timeline, which I found less compelling than the past timeline. And yeah, parts of it go very, very slowly, but I always found myself continuing to turn the page. Personally, I found it to be a really gothic story, and a slow, creeping vibe seems like a really characteristic trait of the genre. It's very atmospheric as well, more uneasy than actual scary horror, except for a few scenes, I think, that include the yellow jackets. What I think really made it work for me is that it uses a few devices that I really enjoy and feel biased towards. I like trying to connect dual timelines, I like stories within stories, I'm also such a sucker for footnotes in a book, and of course, I love queer women, and I think all of the main women of this story are sapphic. Don't quote me on that. I don't quite remember if that is true, but this is definitely a sapphic story. Primarily a gothic horror, but there are sapphic elements. So if you like those things and you like haunted schools, Hollywood vibes, creepy insects, give this a try. Just know that it's slow and it's going to take you a while to get through it. The next book is Open Veins of Latin America by Eduardo Galeano, which has 26,950 ratings on Goodreads. I give this book 4 stars. This is a nonfiction that dives into Latin American history, specifically discussing the exploitation of Latin American resources and people by European countries and the United States. It was published back in the late 90s, so be aware that it's not entirely up to date, but it covers the previous 5 centuries worth of history, and even though it's been about 30 years since its publication, I think it's still highly relevant and puts into perspective some of the current conditions that Latin American countries are in. I think more people should read this book. It genuinely changed my perspective on some things. It's a rare nonfiction where I feel like I walked away having grown as a person. Galeano has a dynamic way of describing things which makes events feel more emotionally charged. There were a lot of points during this book where I was sad or furious or just outraged by the things that were happening. For some people, I can see that being a downside in a nonfiction. I saw a lot of criticisms of it being just a left-wing rant or it being too biased. And I will say that Galeano's views on things are very clear. That being said, as far as I'm aware, he backs everything up with facts. The information in this book, from what I remember, is dense, okay? If you want a detached, totally neutral history book, that's not what you're going to get with this. But I would argue that people who are ignorant of the damage that colonizers have done to Latin American countries do not deserve to be detached from exploitation and devastation. I definitely feel like I deserved to feel the emotions that Galeano was trying to elicit out of me. I highly recommend this. I think anyone stands to learn something from this. And now we're going to change the vibes immediately with Meg by Steve Alton. So Meg has 25,283 ratings on Goodreads at the time of this video. I gave this 4 stars. Think of Meg as like Jurassic Park, but for sharks. That is essentially all you really need to know about it. Basically, a deep sea exploration discovers that the megalodon, a truly massive, ferocious, prehistoric shark, is not as extinct as everyone thinks. And not only do they discover a megalodon, a series of coincidental factors allows that megalodon to swim up from the deep sea trenches to the top of the ocean where humans would be swimming. Thus begins what is a series of bloody, action-packed scenes that are truly reminiscent of Jurassic Park. It's a total nostalgia read for me. I have a fear of the deep ocean. I don't like any depth of water where I can't touch the bottom, except for pools, because at least I know exactly what is inside of a pool. So for me, Meg is a nightmare. It's honestly just a mindless fun, great for an airport read, you know? The Monsters of Templeton by Lauren Groff with 22,087 ratings. So in this book, our main character, Willie, runs back to her hometown after her affair with her married archaeologist professor ends disastrously. She's hoping to hide away in her ancestral home in upstate New York where her mother still lives, but 2 mysteries arise that disturb the peace and have the potential to rock the entire town. The first is that Willie finds out that her father is not just some random guy, but rather someone in the town. And second, a 55-foot corpse of a monster surfaces in the town's lake. I apparently gave this book 5 stars, which was surprising to me because I don't really remember me having 5-star feelings about it. I'm very ambivalent towards it. I feel like it could be such a good story, but I wasn't in the right time of my life to actually appreciate it. I don't really remember much about it. I just remember that I think I was too young for the story, not because there are a bunch of mature content, but because it dealt with life experiences that I just wasn't old enough to really understand. I think I read this book when I was like in middle school. I'm hopeful that I'll like it on a reread. But I did reread another Lauren Groff book recently and I DNF'd it like less than 100 pages in. Okay, next we have an entire series, which is the Monstrumologist series by Rick Yancey. The only book that I've put up here is book number 1, which has 20,553 ratings. The number of ratings drops drastically for the rest of the books. Book number 2 in the series has 7,987. Book number 3 has 5,478. And then the 4th book, which I believe is the last book in the series, has 3,688. I think this series is underread. I gave the 2nd book in the series 4 stars, and then the other 3 books in the series, including this first one, I gave them all 5 stars. The Monstrumologist series is a series for people who like Victorian era settings and Monster of the Week shows. You have to like both. You cannot like just one or the other. The series follows Dr. Pellinor Warthorpe and his 12-year-old assistant, Will Henry. Warthorpe is a monstrumologist, which sounds exactly like what it sounds like. He studies monsters and strange things. It's like the old-timey version of what I imagine a cryptozoologist is, or what they would be if they had like actual monster specimens to study. One night, Warthorpe and Will Henry get a late-night visit from a grave robber who discovered a strange corpse. The creature, and please forgive me if I am misremembering the description, is shaped roughly like a human, but several feet taller. It has no head, however, and the mouth, full of sharp, shark-like teeth, is placed where a stomach would be for humans. Warthorpe recognizes the creature as an anthropophagy, but it raises some questions. The anthropophagy are, first of all, not native to North America, where this story takes place. I want to say that it takes place somewhere in Northeast America, but I'm not sure. Either way, the anthropophagy are not native to the region. So how did they get there to begin with? Another really important question is, are there more? Because as far as Warthorpe knows, anthropophagy do not travel as solo creatures, they travel as a pack. And thus begins an investigation in which Warthorpe and Will Henry try to hunt down the anthropophagy. I love this series. The first book, at least, I can't remember about the rest of them, is written like journal entries from Will Henry, who is reminiscing on his boyhood much later in his life. I love that kind of narrative choice. Some people may think it's like really heavy-handed with the foreshadowing. I don't care. I love the foreshadowing that comes from that kind of thing. I love the ominous feeling that it always has. I especially love when there's a sprinkle of regret and a lingering feeling of fear and being haunted. The writing style won't be for everyone because this is set over a century in the past, and I think anyone who has read Victorian set books knows that it tends to have more of a dry, classic style of writing. That being said, I thought it was so interesting and entertaining to read. It was gory at times. I think it will really scratch the itch for people who miss the first 2 seasons of Supernatural. Also, another comp that I don't know if people will get, but if you have read The Alienist by Caleb Carr, I feel like you might like The Monstrumologist. All right, and now we're getting into the next bracket of ratings with books that have less than 20,000 ratings, starting with Frankenstein in Baghdad by Ahmed Saadawi. This book has, or balance, first of all, okay. This book has 19,276 ratings on Goodreads. It's another one where I'm shocked by the amount of readers it has. Maybe by the time this video goes up, it'll have broken 20K. It definitely deserves to break 20K and much more, honestly. As I'm sure you can see from the title, this is a Frankenstein-inspired story that is based in US-occupied Baghdad, Iraq. We are following a cast of characters who are all, in their own ways, dealing with the trauma of the violence that is happening around them. Not only with the US occupants, but also with the corrupt Iraqi organizations. Car bombings are being used frequently, people are going missing or turning up dead. One of the characters, Hadi, is so traumatized and angry and grieving because so many people are dying, but they're not being treated with the care and respect that humans deserve. So he starts collecting body parts, many, I think, from car bombings that have torn their bodies to pieces, and he starts stitching them together into one corpse with the intention of forcing the government to acknowledge as people rather than just singular detached body parts and giving them a proper burial. That body, however, is then inhabited by the soul of somebody else who died and it goes missing. From there start to be reports of a murder spree happening around the city. I gave this book 3 stars, but I think it deserved more. I just wasn't in the right mood for the writing style at the time. I recognize now that if I were to read this at a better time, it would probably get a higher rating than what I gave it the first time. I also think this might be a book that's just better on a reread because there are several characters we're following and it's not always easy to follow exactly what's happening or what's real versus not. It can get a little confusing at times. And having an idea of the plot going into it with a second reread might make it easier to fully grasp the themes of the story. But that may just be me. I maybe just should have focused better on the first read. I highly recommend giving this book a try if it intrigues you. It 100% deserves more readers than it currently has. It's a thought-provoking book with an apt metaphor that criticizes the way bodies are dehumanized and people are desensitized during times of war and conflict. This book uses quite a bit of dark humor, so be aware of that. For some people, the humor might help you stomach the actual horror of the story. But Frankenstein in Baghdad also has philosophical questions that I think fans of the original classic would like to see. Like I mentioned, the ensemble cast takes a little bit of getting used to, but luckily there's a character guide in the beginning to help you along. I really think that this is a book that benefits from having an ensemble cast, not only because it supports the goal of depicting the reality of different Iraqi lives, but also because you can see how the monster is perceived by different people, and through their perception, I think you can see how they are coping with the world around them. All right, the next book is Hold Me Closer, Necromancer. So this book has 18,112 ratings, and I don't remember anything about it. I gave it 4 stars. Because I don't remember anything, I'm just gonna read the synopsis to you. Sam leads a pretty normal life. He may not have the most exciting job in the world, but he's doing all right until a fast food prank brings him to the attention of Douglas, a creepy guy with an intense violent streak. Turns out Douglas is a necromancer who raises the dead for cash and sees potential in Sam. Then Sam discovers he's a necromancer too, but with strangely latent powers, and his worst nightmare wants to join forces, or else. With only a week to figure things out, Sam needs all the help he can get. Luckily, he lives in Seattle, which has nearly as many paranormal types as it does coffee places. but even with newfound friends, will Sam be able to save his skin? Yeah, my memory regarding this book is not helped by the fact that I have 2 YA necromancy books on my shelves. So I can't for the life of me tell you how I feel about this one versus the other one. I remember feeling like one of them had very juvenile writing. Is it this one or is it the other one? I'm not sure. Stay tuned for the other necromancy book because it is also on this list. Okay, next we have another nonfiction book called Skeletons on the Sahara by Dean King. This has 12,159 ratings. So this is a nonfiction book about a survival journey in the Sahara Desert. In 1815, a ship from Connecticut crashed on the coast of Africa, leaving the entire crew stranded in a region entirely unknown to them. They almost immediately have hostile encounters with the natives. They are eventually sold into slavery, and along their journey towards freedom and escape, they are dragged through the Sahara Desert. I gave this book 3 stars. I remember being fascinated by the events themselves and invested in whether or not these people survived, but I believe the writing was sometimes too dry, pun intended. I think sometimes the author got stuck too much in the details and facts rather than the human aspect of the story, so that it sometimes felt more like a history textbook kind of book rather than a biography. Next, we have another Eduardo Galeano book called The Book of Embraces, which has 11,193 ratings. The Book of Embraces is a weird one to categorize. It's almost like a collection of poetry, but not really. It's almost like a collection of short stories, except those short stories are very short, sometimes a few paragraphs, sometimes only a few sentences. It is almost like a memoir, except I don't really know how much of this is based in the facts of his life. They're musings, let's say, over a range of topics, including love, friends, war, violence, etc. I gave this book 5 stars, which I really didn't think I was going to when I first started reading it. I didn't click with it at all at first. I would pick it up, I would read a few pages, and then I would put it down, really disinterested. One day, I don't know, I picked it up, I started from the beginning, and it was fantastic. The more I read it, the more pieces I collected, and the more I felt like I was getting a fuller picture. Most of these snippets are unrelated to each other in terms of events, except for a few I think that are connected, but what really connects them are these overarching themes. With every snippet that you collect, I think the book just becomes fuller and richer in emotion. I think a part of the reason I found it difficult to begin with is because this book has elements of magical realism. My brain sometimes just finds it difficult to understand things when it's not acknowledged whether or not the author themselves believes something to be real and literal or not. Magical realism is a style that bends reality in such a way that it's difficult sometimes to understand whether something literally happened or if it was a metaphor or someone's imagination. The Book of Embraces, I think, has made me more comfortable with magical realism. At some point, I just stopped trying to identify things as literal or not. I came to this realization that perhaps things didn't happen literally as they are described, but that doesn't make the descriptions any less real and accurate. Basically, reality is complex and layered. Perhaps this collection made my brain a little less rigid. If you find this book at the right time in your life, I think it could really touch your soul. Next, we have Sutton by J.R. Moringer, with 10,689 ratings. This is a historical fiction based on the very real bank robber named William Sutton, who was active in the 1920s and 30s. Here is a synopsis available online. Willie Sutton was born in the squalid Irish slums of Brooklyn in the first year of the 20th century and came of age at a time when banks were out of control. If they weren't failing outright, causing countless Americans to lose their jobs and homes, they were being propped up with emergency bailouts. Trapped in a cycle of panics, depressions, and soaring unemployment, Sutton saw only one way out, only one way to win the girl of his dreams. So began the career of America's most successful bank robber. Over 3 decades, Sutton became so good at breaking into banks and such a master at breaking out of prisons, police called him one of the most dangerous men in New York, and the FBI put him on its first ever most wanted list. But the public rooted for Sutton. He never fired a shot after all, and his victims were merely those blood-sucking banks. When he was finally caught for good in 1952, crowds surrounded the jail and chanted his name. Blending vast research with vivid imagination, Pulitzer Prize winner J.R. Moringer brings Willie Sutton blazing back to life. In this retelling, it was more than poverty or rage at society that drove Sutton. It was one unforgettable woman. In all Sutton's crimes and confinements, his first love and first accomplice was never far from his thoughts. And when Sutton finally walked free, a surprise pardon on Christmas Eve 1969, he immediately set out to find her. I gave this book 5 stars. I don't remember much about the details, but I do remember flying through this book. I remember it being really entertaining and compelling to read, and to be honest, after reading that synopsis, I think it might be a relatable read for some people in today's world. Well, as relatable as it can be without you yourself being a bank robber. All right, we are on to the next bracket, books with less than 10,000 ratings on Goodreads, starting with A Madness of Angels by Kate Griffin. This one has 8,117 ratings. This is an urban fantasy about a sorcerer named Matthew Swift who finds himself resurrected 2 years after he was murdered by an unknown assailant. I remember basically nothing about this except that it felt like the most genuinely urban fantasy of all the urban fantasies I've read. I gave it 3 stars, and I suspect that the reason I did is because I was super invested in the magical ideas within the story, but not so invested in the plot itself, which can be a very disappointing combination. I am looking at you, Water Moon. The reviews that other people left did remind me of some of those magical ideas that I found really intriguing at the time, though. One of which is the Electric Blue Angels. So in this story, the phone lines are home to Electric Blue Angels, which are the bits and pieces of humanity that have been conveyed across the phone lines and taken on a life of their own. When Matthew wakes up post-resurrection, one of the changes that he has to deal with is the fact that his body is now being shared with those Electric Blue Angels. And that is just one of the many ideas in which the author makes every aspect of the urban setting here magical. Perhaps I'll reread this year to give like a better review of it. Next up, we have Foxfire Confessions of a Girl Gang by Joyce Carol Oates. I reread this one recently. This one has 8,184 ratings on Goodreads. So this is a coming of age story about a girl gang that formed in 1950s upstate New York. Foxfire is a group of girls ranging from, I think, 13 to 16 at the beginning of the story who have been dealt a hard hand in life. They're all from the poorer side of town. They've all been neglected by their parents or at least have strained relationships with them. And they have all witnessed men preying on them and other girls around them. They are so full of anger at this victimization and neglect they've experienced, and they are all screaming in the only way they know how to try to get people to see them for who they are, which is a strong group of girls who exist outside of their relationships with men and who are capable of fighting and defending themselves. Vengeance is a really core part of the Foxfire mission. In this book, you're really just along for the ride as the history of Foxfire from its inception to its end is recounted by one of the founding members, Maddie Wirtz. You get to know all the members of the gang, but it's really clear that the main focus is a girl named Leg Sadovsky, the one who inspired every other member of the gang, the one who ultimately flew too close to the sun. I gave this 4 stars. This is not a book that's for everyone. And even those who may enjoy this book may have a hard time getting into it at first. The writing style is very rambly, it's very run-on, and it's not always linear in describing events and topics. The writing feels messy, but in all fairness, that might be an intentional choice since this is framed as being Maddie's confessions. It does read like someone who's talking to you, albeit someone who really goes on and on and on. Getting used to that and not losing focus when the sentence has once again run away from you is difficult at first. I feel like the first 30 pages of this book took longer for me to read than half of the entire book. But once I got past those first 30 pages, I started to enjoy it a lot more. Foxfire covers so many topics, I don't even know where to begin. The core of it is violence against women and girls, which these characters encounter really early on in their lives. Fair warning, there are some descriptions of these girls from the perspective of men who are trying to prey on them, so you need to be able to stomach the sexualization of them on occasion. If you're one of those people who villainize Nabokov for writing Lolita and don't understand what he was trying to do with this book, then you might want to skip this one. This one isn't as nauseating, I think is the word, as Lolita is, but still be aware of that. I think the sexualization in this book serves a similar purpose, and if it makes you feel any better, we are with these girls for years, so they're not tweens for the whole time. You see them grow up as they become even more disillusioned with the world around them. They're so full of pain and anger that they're retaliating against the world. There are times during this book where my heart just broke for them. You can really see how lost they are and how this gang allowed them to find in each other the love and devotion that they weren't getting from anyone else. Female friendship is very important in this story. Is it toxic? Yes, but it is still female friendship. Besides the commentary on violence against women, Foxfire also touches on topics such as the treatment of people in prison, class differences, abortion, and more. There's a lot of the usual issues that you might find in older books, you know, some victim blaming, some fat phobia, even the use of the N-word. I want to believe that most of it is for the purposes of establishing the setting as being in the 50s, and this is somewhat supported by the fact that the characters are occasionally called out for racism. But you have to go into this book as you would with any other book that was written pre-2000 by a white author. Oh, and also, this book is labeled as queer on Goodreads. It is, but not as overtly as people may wish. It's a very queer-coded book, though, in a way that I think it might slip past straight people, but any queer person would clock it a mile away. This is both in terms of sexuality, because the devotion that Foxfire feels for each other crosses a line sometimes, in my opinion, but also in terms of gender, although this is more relevant towards the end of the book. Next up, we have The Last Dickens by Matthew Pearl, which has 7,242 ratings. I don't remember much about this one. This is a historical mystery that takes place in Boston in 1870. Charles Dickens has just suddenly died, and a publisher's clerk who was tasked with picking up the manuscript of Dickens' final unfinished novel is found dead. The manuscript nowhere to be found. So the publisher, James Osgood, has to go on a quest to find the clerk's killer and also find the manuscript that he hopes will save his business. I gave this book 4 stars. I don't remember literally anything about it. Next, we've got another nonfiction, Slavery by Another Name by Douglas A. Blackman. This has 7,091 ratings. This is a nonfiction about the aftermath of the US Civil War, in which legal loopholes were exploited to allow for the continued involuntary servitude of Black people despite the Emancipation Proclamation ostensibly freeing them from slavery. I don't know if this is the official historical term or just something that the author came up with, but in the synopsis, this is called The Age of Neo-Slavery from the end of the Civil War through to the beginnings of World War II. I don't have a rating for this because I read this for a class in university during my freshman year, and I don't typically rate the books that I read for class, but from what I remember, I would say that this was a 5-star experience. I had to write an essay using information from this book and other resources, obviously. I did start that essay at 2 a.m. the night before it was due at 10 a.m. Sleep deprivation aside, I have never been so genuinely interested in formulating and writing my thoughts for an essay. I think this book was my introduction to systemic racism. Maybe we perhaps touched on it during my human geography class in high school, but I don't really remember it. So if this wasn't the literal introduction, it was the most formative introduction to systemic racism for me. Of course, I knew racism existed before, but I don't think I realized just how poisoned the institutions in this country are. It was the first time I really understood that the Emancipation Proclamation, in a practical sense, didn't actually end slavery. They just changed the name of it. It is also when I started looking at the prison system different. I would highly recommend reading this book, and if you are curious, I got a 95% on that essay. Next up, The Secret Supper by Javier Sierra. This has 6,427 ratings. This is a historical thriller centered around Leonardo da Vinci's painting The Last Supper. The Pope has realized that the painting contains some baffling artistic choices that point towards a possibly blasphemous message being encoded into the painting, and he is determined to execute Da Vinci for that. I remember absolutely nothing about this. I gave it 4 stars. I have this vague sense that it is perhaps not as much of a thriller as it claims to be, but I'm willing to bet that a part of the reason why I liked it is because I was coming off of the high of the Da Vinci Code maybe around this time. Okay, and next we have The Grey Friar by Clay and Susan Griffith. This has 5,629 ratings. I have feelings about this book. The Grey Friar is an alternate history fantasy where vampires rose up in 1870 and conquered the northern regions of the world, killing and driving humans down to the southern parts of the world. Our main character, Adele, is the heir to the Empire of Equatoria and has just been kidnapped by vampires. I originally gave this 3 stars. That's not happening. I simply do not recommend this book. We're moving on to Rasputin's Daughter by Robert Alexander. This has 3,815 ratings. A little bit of context for those who don't know, Grigory Rasputin is a real historical figure. He was a mystic and faith healer who worked for Russia's last emperor, that being the father of Anastasia for the people who have watched the movie. This book is a historical fiction based on him. In the wake of the Russian Revolution, Maria Rasputin, eldest of the Rasputin children, recounts her infamous father's final days, building a breathless narrative of intrigue, excess, and conspiracy that reveals the shocking truth of her father's end and the identity of those who arranged it. I gave this 3 stars. My memories are vague, but I feel like 3 stars was probably generous because I think this was a book that I found boring, but I was studying Russian language at the time, so I found anything connected to the culture to just be interesting. I was a little biased. Mechanique by Genevieve Valentine. This has 3,219 ratings. This is a post-apocalyptic steampunk fantasy book centered around the Circus Tresalti. All of the performers in the circus have been physically altered by the ringmaster to have metal body parts that help them perform in their shows. But the most coveted piece of machinery is a pair of metal wings that have been left untouched since its last wearer died. 2 members of the circus are in a tense standoff, both vying for the wings, when a government man starts sniffing around the circus and seeming too curious about the metal alterations, which the circus pretends are only costumes. I gave this book 5 stars. I think it's maybe a little bit of a bias highest rating, but I stand by it, and I do think more people should read this book. I specifically think both people who loved the night circus and people who were a little disappointed by the night circus should read this, especially if you wanted a little bit less romance and a little bit more stakes from the night circus. It shares a lot of traits, as you can tell from the synopsis of it, but Mechanique is more grisly, I think. It starts by going through how the bodies of all the performers are altered. The strongman Ayar, for instance, has a metal spine that allows him to hold up everything. The aerialists have their bones replaced with hollow ones so they can fly through the air better. Every performer in this circus has been altered in some way or another. The book is not so dark as to give detailed descriptions of the procedures themselves, but it doesn't shy away from the emotional consequences of those choices. It's not fast or urgent, just like the night circus wasn't, but it is subtly unsettling and tense all the way through. This competition for the wings is happening a little bit more in a background sense, but it is very present throughout the story. The two vying for the wings are willing to hurt each other to come out on top. I think it just has higher stakes than the night circus did. Mechanique is written in kind of a vignette style of writing. Most of the book is from the perspective of little George as he's beginning to learn how the circus really functions, but we get vignettes that give us the backstories of all the other characters. I really enjoy getting the backstories and POVs on everyone. They can be a little detached, if only because the POV character themselves are too traumatized to fully think about certain things, but they were certainly impactful enough that I felt differently about people by the end of the story. Basically, Mechanique just feels like a grittier, harsher night circus. All right, and then we have The Exception by Christian Jungerson. This has 2,753 ratings. This is a thriller that I gave 4 stars to. I don't remember the plot itself, but I remember that it made me feel tense. I feel like I remember my heart racing as I was getting a little bit sucked into the paranoia of the book. 4 women work together for a small nonprofit in Copenhagen that disseminates information on genocide. When 2 of them receive death threats, they immediately believe they are being stalked by Mirko Zijic, a Serbian torturer and war criminal whom they have recently profiled in their articles. As the tensions mount among the women, their suspicions turn away from Mirko and towards each other. The threats increase, and soon the office becomes a battlefield in which each of the women's moves is suspect. Their obsessions turn into a witch hunt as they resort to bullying and victimization. Yet these are people who daily analyze cases of appalling cruelty on a worldwide scale, and who are intimate with the psychology of evil. The cruelty that the women have described from a safe distance is now revealed in their own world. They discover that none of them is exactly the person she seems to be. And then they learn that Interpol has traced Mirko to Denmark. All right, next we have The Colony, the harrowing true story of the exiles of Molokai by John Tayman. All right, I am also just going to read the summary for this one. The Colony reveals the untold history of the infamous American leprosy settlement on the Hawaiian island of Molokai and of the exceptional people who managed to survive under the most horrific circumstances. In 1866, 12 men and women and 1 small child were put aboard a leaky schooner and cast away to an island prison. 2 weeks later, a dozen others were exiled, then 40 more, and then 100. Tracked by bounty hunters and torn from their families, the luckless were loaded into shipboard, cattle stalls, and abandoned in a lawless place where brutality held sway. Many did not have leprosy, and many who did were not contagious, yet all were ensnared in a shared nightmare. Their natural prison had little food, little medicine, and terribly little hope. Exile continued for more than a century, the longest and deadliest instance of medical segregation in American history. In all, more than 8,000 people were banished to the settlement. Some remain there today. Here, for the first time, John Tayman reveals the complete history of this fascinating and troubling spot and its inhabitants. Using rare historical documents, letters, journals, government reports, newspaper accounts, and hundreds of hours of interviews, he tells the story of unsuspecting people tumbled into a situation beyond imagination. It is a fantastic epic of ruthless manhunts, thrilling escapes, shipwrecks and tidal waves, murder and mutiny, bizarre medical experiments, and tragic, irreversible error. I gave this 4 stars. Another one that I don't really remember, but I have a fiction book on the same topic. So I remember being excited to read more about the facts behind the events in this book. Next, we have Like a Love Song by Gabriella Martins, which has 1,653 ratings. This is a fake dating YA romance. After Brazilian pop star Nathi gets humiliatingly dumped on live television, she and British indie film star William decide to fake date and put on a show for paparazzi to save her reputation and boost his. I gave it 5 stars. It's a cute, wholesome story, perfect for when you just want a happy little time. I love that they got to know each other as friends before actually falling for each other. I loved the banter both between them and between the friends in the book, and I love that they each had their own personal journeys to go through outside of the romance. Then Fancy Necromancy by Randy Henderson. This got 1,476 226 ratings. Yes, this is the second YA necromancy book that I promised earlier. I gave this one 4 stars, and just like the other one, I don't remember anything about it, so... Finn was framed for the crime of dark necromancy at the age of 15 and exiled to the other realm for 25 years. But now that he's free, someone, probably the same someone who framed him, is trying to get him sent back. Finn has only a few days to discover who is so desperate to keep him out of the mortal world and find evidence to prove it to the arcane enforcers. But Finn has his family, his brother Mort, who is running the family necrotorium business now, his brother Pete, who believes he's a werewolf, though he is not, and his sister Samantha, who is unfortunately allergic to magic. And he's got Zeke, a fellow exile and former enforcer who doesn't really believe in Finn's innocence but is willing to follow along in hopes of getting his old job back. Having read that synopsis, I kind of feel like this is maybe the necromancy book that I had liked more than the other one. All right, we are getting towards the end. Next, we have Van Gogh's Ear by Bernadette Murphy. This has 1,383 ratings. This is a nonfiction biography about Van Gogh. If I recall correctly, it does cover all of his life, but it's focused around the incident when Van Gogh cut off his ear. It attempts to answer the questions of what happened that night, what led Van Gogh to doing that, and who was the woman he supposedly presented the ear to. Van Gogh is one of my favorite painters. His story around mental health has always made me sad, and I remember this book making me feel even more pity and empathy for him. I remember having an easy time reading it, and I think I had the impression that it was well researched. Don't remember much though, because I think I read it in maybe 2018, 2019. I did give it 4 stars though. Okay, we are on to the very last bracket of the video. Books with less than 1,000 ratings on Goodreads, starting with Little Fur, the legend... Oh, okay, well, let me just take that off then. Little Fur, The Legend Begins by Isobelle Carmody. This had 947 ratings. This is a middle grade book about an elf troll named Little Fur who lives in a little patch of wilderness near a human city. Little Fur is a healer who sings to the trees to protect the wilderness, but then Little Fur hears from Crow that humans are planning to come and burn down the trees. So she decides to venture into the dangerous human city to try to prevent this. I give this 5 stars. I absolutely think more people should read it. I think it's so cute and warm and cozy. The perfect book to read during a lazy weekend morning. I just have such a distinct memory of me lounging in bed with a smile on my face because it is such an endearing story. It's a charming little adventure with an environmentalist theme. All right, our second to last book, The Liminal People by Ayiz Jama Everett. This has 621 ratings. This is an urban fantasy book that I remember comparing to X-Men because the titular liminal people all have their own superpowers. Membership in the Razorneck crew is for life, but when Taggart, who can heal and hurt with just a touch, receives a call from the past, he is honor-bound to try and help the woman he once loved try to find her daughter. Taggart realizes the girl has more power than even he can imagine and has to wrestle with the nature of his own skills, not to mention risking the wrath of his enigmatic master and perhaps even the gods in order to keep the girl safe. In the end, Taggart will have to delve into the depths of his heart and soul to survive. After all, what really matters is family. I gave this 3 stars. I remember it not really giving me a strong impression one way or another, which might be because it's a really short book and maybe it would give more of an impression if I read the rest of the series. I believe this is a series. And our final book, A Carnivore's Inquiry by Sabina Murray. This had 536 ratings. This was a random indie book that I found during the Miami Book Fair that I mentioned at the beginning. 23-year-old Catherine Shea is a restless and voracious spirit, hungry for knowledge, experience, and the occasional affair with an older man. But her travels from the monuments of Italy through literary New York and rural Maine to the dusty Southwest are shadowed by a string of unexplained murders. As the victims pile up in frighteningly close proximity to Catherine, she finds comfort and inspiration in the manifestations of cannibalism in literature, art, and history. Slowly, she senses that at the center of the mysterious deaths lie a bloody and unpalatable truth. And with mounting dread, she closes in on the real reason for her own obsession with aberrant, savage behavior. A Carnivore's Inquiry is a sly, addictive exploration of humanity's disturbing appetites and its ruthless capacity for survival. So here's the thing about this book. I gave it 3 stars, and I don't know if it deserves that, because I remember being shocked by the twist in the story, but in hindsight, I don't know that it should have been a twist that shocked me, or if I was just a little dumb and forgot what the synopsis of the story was and was able to be caught off guard by the twist. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm being a little bit vague about things. What I do remember was that it was not the best reading experience, and I remember thinking that it lacked in editing. And that is it. Let me know in the comments what your favorite underread books are. I will see you in the next one.